Hi everyone, today we're looking at the exact intersection where dumb decisions meet terrible luck, in what just might be the most mind-boggling cases ever recorded. From a man struck down by a flying cow, to a burglar who ignored the open door he burgled and decided climbing onto the roof was somehow a better idea, only to meet a worse fate. It was September 24th, 2012, and the afternoon sun beat down on a railway line in Madhya Pradesh, India. Trains passed through the area every day, and warning signs reminded people to stay away from the tracks. Ramesh Patel was 43 years old and had once worked for the Indian Railways. He lived with his wife and their 4 children. For many years, he had been the one who paid the bills, but everything changed after he was caught stealing railway property and lost his job. After that, he struggled to find steady work. His wife kept the family alive by selling vegetables from a small roadside stall. The money was never enough, and each month became harder than the last. On the morning of September 24th, the pressure finally became too much. His wife told him she was tired of carrying the whole family alone. She said she could not keep working every day while he stayed home without a job. Ramesh became angry. He reminded her that he had once provided for everyone and said she should understand he was only going through a difficult phase in his life. His wife answered that the children needed food, not excuses. Hurt, embarrassed, and angry, Ramesh walked out of the house. There's something about being reminded of who you used to be by someone you love that hits differently than any other kind of criticism. I think that conversation is the real beginning of this case. Instead of looking for work, he returned to the railway where he had once been employed. The tracks reminded him of the life he had lost. He stood there for a while, thinking about his past and everything that had gone wrong. After some time, he needed to relieve himself. There was open ground only a short distance away where he could have gone safely, but he chose to step onto the railway tracks instead. A few moments later, he noticed a train coming from far away. Because he had worked on the railway before, he believed he knew exactly how much time he had before it reached him. A railway maintenance worker farther down the line spotted him on the tracks. The worker immediately began waving both arms and shouting for Ramesh to get off the railway line. Ramesh looked at the worker, became annoyed, and shouted back for him to stop interfering. He refused to move. Believing he knew better, because he had once worked there, he ignored every warning. I want to say something about what pride can do to a person's judgment. Ramesh was just humiliated, and in that state, a stranger telling him what to do on a railway he used to work on probably felt like one insult too many. The railway worker continued shouting and waving until the very last moment, but Ramesh stayed where he was. Seconds later, the train struck a cow that had wandered onto the tracks. The force of the impact launched the animal high into the air. In an extraordinary chain of events, the airborne cow crashed directly into Ramesh. The train never touched him, but the falling animal caused devastating injuries. The cow landed a short distance away after the impact and died. The railway maintenance worker immediately called for help. Other railway staff rushed to the scene, and paramedics arrived a short time later. They examined Ramesh and found that his injuries were too severe for him to survive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The train did not hit him. A cow hit him. I have covered a lot of these cases, and I have never encountered a sequence quite like this one. The universe has a brutal sense of irony sometimes. The railway maintenance worker told authorities his own side of the story, while Ramesh's wife was informed of what had happened. She was left to care for their 4 children alone, and investigators concluded that ignoring repeated warnings on the railway tracks had led to the tragic chain of events that ended his life. What happened in Melbourne is quieter than that. A young woman, a video game, and a heater her sister had been asking her to throw away for months. It was August 18th, 2022, and the afternoon was quiet in a suburb of Melbourne, Australia. Inside a small family home, a spare room held furniture pushed to the walls, loose cables on the floor, and an old portable electric heater with a badly cracked casing. Natalie Vickers was 31 years old and worked remotely for a technology company based outside the state. She lived with her older sister Diane in the house they had inherited from their parents. The aging house still had outdated electrical wiring and lacked a modern residual current device, RCD, safety switch, a problem they had talked about fixing but kept putting off. Natalie loved video games and regularly played room-scale virtual reality games that required her to move around freely. She had never been careful about clearing space before playing, and Diane often worried about her reckless approach to the headset. The old heater in the room had a cracked casing that exposed its internal electrical components. Natalie knew the heater was damaged and had mentioned wanting to replace it, but she continued using it because it still seemed to work. Several months earlier, she had tripped over a loose cable while wearing the VR headset and crashed into a bookshelf, spraining her wrist and suffering severe bruising. Diane had also reminded her that the house had no modern RCD safety switch, making damaged electrical appliances especially dangerous. Diane had urged her to clear the room and dispose of the damaged heater. Natalie had agreed but never followed through. I have had that conversation so many times in my own life, agreeing to fix something and then just never quite doing it because nothing bad has happened yet. That gap between agreeing and acting is where so many of these stories live. On the afternoon of August 18th, Natalie decided to play another room-scale VR game. Before she put on the headset, Diane warned her again not to play in the cramped room and reminded her about the previous fall, the loose cables, and the damaged heater. Natalie said she would be careful and started the game anyway. Diane left to read in another room. As the game became more active, Natalie dodged and moved quickly around the room while the headset blocked her view of everything around her. Minutes into the game, her foot caught on one of the loose cables. She fell heavily onto the plugged-in heater, and the impact broke its already damaged casing further. As she tried to push herself up, her hand made contact with an energized internal electrical component, while her other hand touched the metal heater frame and her body pressed against the floor. Because the house had no functioning RCD safety switch to quickly cut the power, the electrical current continued flowing through her body. She suffered a severe electric shock and collapsed into cardiac arrest. Diane heard the loud crash and ran into the room. She saw the damaged heater and recognized the danger of live electricity, so she did not touch Natalie. She called emergency services immediately and switched off the main electrical supply before going to her sister. Diane knew not to touch her until the power was off, but even then, Natalie could not be saved. Paramedics arrived and began advanced resuscitation efforts, but Natalie could not be revived and was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators documented the damaged heater, the cluttered play area, and the home's outdated electrical system. Authorities concluded that Natalie had died from accidental electrocution caused by a fall onto a damaged electrical appliance while wearing a virtual reality headset in an unsafe environment. Diane later had the faulty heater removed and the home's electrical system upgraded, hoping no one else would ever suffer the same fate. The next story happened in Nepal, where a 21-year-old student saw a giant tractor tire on a hillside and made a decision he could never take back. It was June 15th, 2020, and the afternoon was warm in a remote mountain area near Pokhara, Nepal. An unfinished road construction project had been abandoned for years, leaving behind scattered pieces of heavy equipment on the hillside. Sanjay Bhatt was 21 years old and studied engineering at a college in Pokhara. He enjoyed making people laugh and often acted without thinking about consequences. His parents had worked hard to pay for his education, hoping he would become the first graduate in their family. His friends knew he liked attempting unusual stunts for entertainment and attention. Several years earlier, construction crews had started building a mountain road, but the project stopped when funding ran out. Most machines were removed, but an old tractor remained near the hillside. One of its massive rear tires had come loose and rested on the grassy slope below, exposed to sun and rain for years until it hardened and became heavy and stiff. After arriving at the abandoned construction site with 5 college friends, Sanjay wandered around the area while taking in the mountain views. As they explored, they spotted a giant tractor tire lying on the slope. Sanjay walked over to it and said he could simply roll down inside the tire instead of hiking to the river. His friends laughed because they thought he was joking. He mentioned he had done something similar years earlier with a smaller tire on a gentle hill and nothing had happened. Trust me when I say this. That previous smaller tire is the whole reason this happened. If that first experience had gone badly, he never climbs inside of this one. Sometimes surviving something teaches exactly the wrong lesson. Before anyone could stop him, he climbed inside the tire and positioned himself within it. His friends expected him to climb back out after a moment. Instead, Sanjay pushed the tire forward with his body weight. The massive tire immediately began rolling downhill and gathered speed far faster than he anticipated. He tried to stop it, but was trapped inside with no way to escape. His friends stood frozen before running after the tire, but it rolled beyond their reach within seconds. The tire bounced over rocks and rough ground, moving faster down the steep slope. It hit the riverbank and tilted forward, rolling directly into the water. The front edge sank first and the tire flipped completely with Sanjay inside. Cold river water rushed in immediately. He was curled in a tight position inside the tire with his knees drawn up and his arms pressed against his sides. Sanjay tried to straighten his body to push his way out, but the tire's narrow opening and his awkward position made movement nearly impossible. The tire weighed over 300 pounds and the current held it firmly on the riverbed. Water filled the space around him as he thrashed against the rubber walls, but he could not escape. His body remained trapped inside as water entered his airways. His friends immediately called emergency services. Local police, firefighters, and rescue workers arrived within the hour. After recovering the tire from the river, they found Sanjay trapped inside. Paramedics examined him and pronounced him dead at the scene. His parents were informed by the authorities. I wonder how they all live with the fact that they gave all they had and all they got was a dead body. That can take years to heal from. Investigators concluded that the steep hillside and the tire's massive weight caused it to accelerate beyond control. They determined that walking down the hill with the group would have prevented the tragedy entirely. The next story is about a man who knew the mountain well but still chose a stunt that cost him his life. It was January 22nd, 2016, and the afternoon was cold at a ski resort near McCall, Idaho. Skiers filled the marked slopes while cars traveled along a busy mountain road that ran beside the resort. Garrett Melrose was 32 years old and worked as a professional snowboard instructor at the resort. Every winter, he taught people of all ages how to snowboard. During the snow season, he earned most of his income, and when the snow melted, he ran a small breakfast cafe in town. Snowboarding had been his career for years, and he was known as an experienced rider. He lived with his wife, and together they were saving money to expand their cafe into a larger restaurant. Garrett had already finished teaching for the day, but instead of heading home, he stayed on the mountain for a few more runs. While riding, he spotted a steep, snow-covered embankment overlooking a busy mountain road. On the opposite side was another snow-covered slope. He decided to leave the designated ski area and attempt to jump across the road on his snowboard. I think experience in any physical skill eventually creates a blind spot. The better you get, the harder it becomes to locate the edge of what you actually cannot do. Garrett had been on that mountain for years, and I think that familiarity is a part of what made this feel possible to him. Garrett knew the road carried moving traffic because it ran alongside the resort. He also knew that if he failed to clear the jump, he could land directly in front of a moving vehicle. Even with that knowledge, he continued with the stunt. He was not wearing a helmet. He backed up to build speed and rode toward the edge of the embankment. As he reached the lip of the jump, he launched himself into the air, expecting to clear both lanes of the road. Instead, he underestimated the distance. He lost momentum before reaching the other side and landed hard in the middle of the roadway, his snowboard sliding beneath him on the pavement. At the same moment, an SUV came around a bend, traveling at approximately 50 miles per hour. The driver had only a split second to react. There was no time to stop and no safe way to steer around Garrett. The front end of the vehicle struck him at full road speed. The impact lifted him off the ground and threw him across the hood and windshield. His body hit the pavement hard behind the vehicle as it skidded to a stop. He suffered multiple fractures to his legs, ribs, and pelvis, severe head trauma, and massive internal bleeding. He lay motionless on the cold road. People nearby immediately called emergency services. Ski Patrol arrived within minutes and began first aid until paramedics reached the scene. Despite their efforts, Garrett's injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife was saving up with him to expand their cafe. They had plans. That SUV driver came around a bend on a normal afternoon and had no ability to change what happened next. I don't even know what I would have done if I was in their shoes. The SUV driver later told investigators that Garrett suddenly appeared in front of the vehicle after falling from above. Investigators examined the scene and determined that Garrett had deliberately left the marked ski slopes and attempted to jump across an active public road. They concluded that the collision occurred because he failed to clear the roadway before the SUV reached him. Garrett knew the risks. The next story is about a man whose decision made no sense from the start. It was October 11th, 2017, and the night was quiet in Reno, Nevada. Most businesses had closed for the day, and the streets around a small shopping plaza were almost empty. Delmar Trevino was 37 years old and had once worked as a roofer. He had learned the job from his father and spent many years repairing houses and commercial buildings. When construction work slowed down, he struggled to find steady jobs. He fell behind on rent, his pickup truck was repossessed, and his girlfriend moved out after months of arguing about money. He was living alone in a cheap motel and had started stealing from empty buildings to get by. He had been arrested once before for burglary, but was released after serving a short sentence. Instead of changing his life, he returned to stealing because he believed it was the fastest way to make money. Late that night, Delmar walked through a small shopping plaza looking for a business that looked easy to break into. He stopped outside a hair salon after noticing that it was dark inside and appeared to be empty. Using a pry bar, he forced open the front door. When he stepped inside, he noticed security cameras pointed directly at the entrance. He worried the cameras would clearly show how he had entered the building, instead of leaving through the open door he had already forced open. Delmar came up with another idea. He climbed back outside, carried a ladder behind the building, and climbed onto the roof. He decided to cut a hole through the roof because he believed it would leave less obvious evidence than the damaged front door. The front door was already broken. He had already been on camera, and his solution was to climb onto a dark roof at night with a power saw. I genuinely cannot follow the logic, and I have read this case 3 times. Delmar had worked on roofs before, but this roof was old and weak in several places. He walked across it in the dark, using only a flashlight. After choosing a spot above the salon, he started cutting through the roof with a power saw. The blade bit through layers of old shingles and rotted wood. As the opening became larger, he stepped too close to the edge of the cut section. The roofing material gave way beneath his feet without warning. Delmar fell more than 20 feet through the ceiling and crashed onto the hard tile floor inside the salon below. His body struck the floor with tremendous force. He sustained severe fractures to both legs, his pelvis, and multiple ribs. His head struck the tile, and he suffered catastrophic brain trauma and internal bleeding. He lay motionless and unconscious on the salon floor. The next morning, an employee arrived to open the salon and found part of the ceiling collapsed. I think about what that morning was like for her for a long time after reading this case. She called 911 after seeing Delmar lying motionless on the floor. Police officers, firefighters, and paramedics arrived within minutes. Paramedics examined him and pronounced him dead at the scene. Crime scene investigators found the forced front door, the ladder behind the building, and the hole cut through the roof. They determined that Delmar had already gained entry through the front door before deciding to climb onto the roof because he believed it would hide how he had entered. Instead, the unnecessary trip onto the roof became the reason he lost his life. Delmar made a decision that added danger to an already dangerous situation for no good reason. What happened in Switzerland is different from everything else in this video because the danger was not a situation. It was an idea. It was May 6th, 2014, and the weather was warm in Lausanne, Switzerland. A small apartment sat quiet and still, with no signs of life inside or outside. Vilma Kessner was 40 years old and worked as a biologist. She loved studying plants and spent most of her free time caring for a large vegetable garden behind her home. Every week she harvested fresh vegetables, herbs, and fruit and sold the extra produce to a nearby grocery store. Her neighbors knew her as someone who believed nature held many answers that people had forgotten. She spent her evenings reading books and watching documentaries about health, plants, and natural living. One evening, Vilma watched a documentary about a man who claimed humans could survive without food by living only on sunlight. The claim had no scientific support, but she became convinced it was true. She started reading online and only paid attention to people who agreed with the idea. She ignored the many doctors and scientists who explained that the claim was completely false. I work with information every day, and I still understand how this happens. You find one source that confirms something you want to believe, and you stop looking. It does not make someone foolish. It makes them human. Vilma decided she would prove it herself. She told her family and friends that she was going to stop eating and live only on water and sunlight. They begged her not to do it and reminded her that every human body needs food to survive. Vilma refused to listen. She insisted that the people in the documentary had discovered a secret that most experts refused to accept. She stopped eating completely and drank only water. At first, she felt hungry, but she believed that meant her body was adjusting to a new way of living. As the days passed, she became thinner and weaker. She struggled to work in her garden and became dizzy after only a few minutes outside. Even then, she refused to eat because she believed she was getting closer to proving everyone else wrong. Her sister visited with groceries and pleaded with her to have a meal. A close friend also tried to convince her to stop before it was too late. Vilma thanked them, but turned the food away. She believed eating even one meal would mean she had failed her experiment. I think that is the moment this case stops being about beliefs and becomes something else entirely. For weeks, Vilma consumed nothing but water and sunlight. Her body began to break down rapidly. Her muscle mass decreased as her body burned through its stored energy. Her skin became pale and thin. Her hair started falling out. She became too weak to walk more than a few steps without needing to sit down. Her body temperature dropped, and she felt constantly cold despite the warm weather outside. Her organs began to fail as malnutrition became severe. She developed irregular heartbeat, and her breathing became shallow. She lay in bed most days, unable to move or get up for water. Her heart rhythm became dangerously unstable as her potassium levels dropped critically low, and her organs failed. She stopped breathing entirely in the early morning hours. Neighbors noticed her garden had been left untouched, and vegetables were beginning to spoil. They realized they had not seen Vilma for several days. The building manager unlocked her door after receiving no response. Emergency services were called immediately, but paramedics could only pronounce her dead at the scene. Medical examiners determined that Vilma died from prolonged starvation after going without food for weeks. Her body had exhausted its stored energy, and her organs eventually failed. She was a biologist. She spent her career studying living systems, and a single documentary convinced her that the most basic requirement of every living thing on Earth did not apply to her. I find that genuinely heartbreaking. Investigators concluded that her death resulted from following the false belief that humans can survive without food. Had she accepted food when her family and friends begged her to stop, she would almost certainly have survived. Vilma died chasing a belief. The last case I want to cover today started with a man who saw something impressive on a safari and decided he understood it well enough to recreate it on a motorcycle. It was July 9th, 2013, and the afternoon was hot on a rural road near Kuantan, Malaysia. Cars and motorcycles passed through the area as people traveled home for the day. Ashok Menon was 36 years old and worked as an accountant in Singapore. He had traveled back to Malaysia to spend the holidays with his wife, their 2 children, and his parents. A few weeks before returning home, he had taken a safari trip to South Africa sponsored by his company. During the tour, he watched experienced wildlife guides handle large snakes and pose for photographs with them. The guides made it look easy and controlled. Ashok left believing that pythons were calm animals if someone held them the right way. On the afternoon of July 9th, Ashok was riding his motorcycle through a rural area when he spotted a large python lying beside the road. Instead of leaving it alone, he decided to catch it himself. He wanted to take it home and show his family the huge snake he had captured. After a short struggle, he managed to grab it behind the head. Several people stopped to watch. One man suggested putting the python into a large sack before moving it. Another offered to carry the snake in the back of his pickup truck. Ashok refused both offers. He believed the ride home was short and thought holding the snake by the head would be enough. 2 separate strangers offered him safer options. Both of them saw the problem immediately, and I find myself wondering what it would have taken for Ashok to hear them in that moment. He climbed onto his motorcycle with one hand on the handlebars and the other gripping the python. At first, everything seemed fine as he moved slowly down the road. After a short distance, the snake began twisting its powerful body around his arm and upper body. The python coiled tighter, wrapping itself around his torso. As it tightened, it became harder for Ashok to breathe, and panic quickly set in. He tried to keep his grip on the snake's head while steering the motorcycle at the same time. With the python constricting around his torso and limiting his movement, it became increasingly difficult to control the bike. The motorcycle began drifting toward the center of the road. He jerked the handlebars to correct his direction, but the python's weight and movement made it impossible to regain full control. The front tire caught the edge of a pothole. The motorcycle tilted hard to the right and crashed violently onto the pavement. Ashok was thrown forward onto the road with tremendous force. His body slid across the asphalt, and the motorcycle tumbled several times before coming to rest. He suffered severe fractures to both legs, his collarbone, and multiple ribs. His head struck the pavement, and he sustained serious brain injury and internal bleeding. The python survived the crash and disappeared into nearby bushes. I do not know what to do with that detail. I just think it belongs in the record. People nearby immediately called emergency services. Paramedics arrived a short time later and treated Ashok at the roadside, but his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead before he could be taken to a hospital. Witnesses later told investigators that Ashok had been offered safer ways to transport the snake, but chose to ride away with it in his hand instead. Investigators concluded that the crash happened because he attempted to carry a large live python on a motorcycle instead of transporting it safely. Had he accepted help or secured the snake properly before moving it, the fatal crash would almost certainly have been prevented.